council hearings in person. You tuned into our televised proceedings on Channel 13. Now you have the chance to listen to us on the radio as we demystify our work and the people who do it. This is not a council hearing. This is Hearing the Council with your host, Josh Gibson.
Thank you, deep voice person with a funky backbeat. Indeed, this is not a council hearing, this is Hearing the Council. You can't have a government without a council, so you can't have a government radio station without a council show. This is it. I'm Josh Gibson, Director of Communications for the Council, and you may also know me as our voice on social media at Council of DC. And we are very pleased to be joined once again by Ward 6 Councilmember Charles Allen.
Good to see you, Josh.
Good to see you as well. Thanks for being back.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me.
You're quite welcome. So I think we're going to try to hit a couple topics today. And one of the joys of this show to me is we can touch on topics that the traditional media might not pay attention to or might not pay attention to enough. So even though there's kind of a more time-consuming topic I want to get to, I want to start off with the Fair Housing Practices Bill.
Yes.
There's been some media attention to it, but it addresses a very real problem that has a very real impact on folks. So I'd like you to talk a bit about that bill and where it stands legislatively.
Well, thanks. We just introduced it, so we've got to, from a process standpoint, it's got to go through hearings and votes. But it really came from constituents reaching out to me. So, one of the jobs as a council member is to be able to hear your constituents and then try to work to solve problems. And this was a perfect case. I had neighbors who I went to meet with a building full of residents about a different issue. And while we were there, they brought up this issue of what are called common area utility fees. What that means is they were getting a bill for the lights, for the air conditioning in the hallways, in the community meeting room, in the gym, whether they even use those spaces or not. And it wasn't a de minimis small amount. We're talking about hundreds and in some cases $400 to $500 a month on top of what they had already signed a lease for the rent. This wasn't disclosed up front. This wasn't, part of what the building management even told people they'd be accountable for. And frankly, it was busting all their budgets. So we looked into it, and it seems to be a practice that is happening not at all buildings, but in some. And I think it's predatory. I think it's wrong. And I think the rent should be the rent. So if you're looking to rent a place, I think most people assume the rent you're paying is for living in that building. And we're going to try to ban this. So we've introduced legislation to say that you cannot charge this kind of common area utility. If there is a cost, I'm not denying there's a cost to the building, of course, for utilities, but just be much more transparent about it. Be fair about it. Be upfront about it. Put it in the lease. Let residents and renters be able to decide. But adding hundreds and hundreds of dollars per month to their bill just makes it unaffordable, and I think it's pretty sneaky. I just don't think it's very upfront, and I think we need to stop that practice.
And is this something I'm guessing maybe this is true, maybe it's not, that it's newer buildings, like new construction, or is this something we're seeing also in our older historic buildings?
That's where we've seen it thus far, but it does seem to be a practice that could be anywhere. The residents that I've been talking to are in some of the newer buildings, but let's imagine a resident who's in an inclusionary zoning unit. So, we are intentionally trying to make sure that newer building has affordability for all. And you think you've got an affordable unit, then all of a sudden you get hit with $400 per month. That's thousands of dollars per year that you weren't budgeting for. And frankly, they never even told you about. So it really hits the affordability of our city. It starts driving up what the supposed rent would be. And I just, again, think it's a practice that shouldn't be there. I think we owe it to people to be upfront, be fair, be transparent. So the legislation just stops that. We just heard from a resident just this week who said that they're now seeing a charge for common area wireless fees, whether or not they even use the wireless internet in the lobby or somewhere else. I've rented before. The rent you pay is what you think you're paying for living in that building. Starting to just add on and tack on these fees after you've already signed the lease. So it's not upfront. That's the problem. And that's what we're going to go after. And I think that's what we're going to make change for our renters and for our residents in DC.
Right. I mean, as long as there has been rent, or even if you own, condo fees, co-op fees, that's just something that's bundled in what you pay the building, and to try to
Exactly.
break that out is, I mean, I'm not sticking to 100% of this analogy, but I think it's a little bit the way folks feel about service charges at restaurants.
It feels very similar to those kind of just hidden fees that come at you after, right? I think people can understand when they've got a rent and then there's a $50 fee that is advertised up front. You know what it is. That's a lot different. What we're seeing in lease language is just kind of a vague clause that says something like, all other fees deemed reasonable by the manager. And then you get hit with hundreds of dollars of a bill. That's just not, I think, acceptable. That's not fair. It's not transparent. At the end of the day, what I hear from residents is just tell us what the rent's going to be. Let the rent be the rent. And don't hide the fees. Don't try to tack them on later. Just say what the rent is. And that also allows renters to be on a level playing field so they know what the rent is in building A, building B, building C, and they can make a more informed choice about which community they want to be a part of.
Yeah, I mean, the whole essence of economics is clarity and communication, and knowing
Yeah.
before you make an economic decision all the factors involved.
Yeah.
And yeah, to sneak something in after the fact, I guess the concept is to make something seem cheaper than it is.
Exactly.
So anyway, so I wanted to make sure we got to that bill, because it's might not be the sexiest thing, but it has a real dollars and cents impact on
Exactly. Yeah.
folks. I mean, make or break. If
Yeah. For
your
anybody who's
budget's,
renting,
yeah,
I've been uh, grateful for how many renters have reached out to us after they've heard about this, letting people know, hey, this is happening to me too. So it's allowed us to really get a better picture of how broad this issue is and how many people it's impacting.
And have you heard from any of the landlords, the building owners, to say why all of a sudden something people have never been charged a breakout fee before have started to be charged that fee?
Well, it seems to be in some of these buildings, there are two separate entities. There's the landlord, but then there's a management company. And the management company is the one who is a for-profit business trying to manage a property for a profit. And so that's actually what we're seeing is the management companies. I'm not actually sure if it's the landlords because they just own the property. It is the management companies that have the profit-making interest to just try to charge for every little fee they possibly can. So I've heard from a couple of them. They know that Maryland has tackled this issue already. Virginia has even worked on this issue. So I think they know that the district is coming as well. And I think that I fully expect that we'll see a really healthy engagement from some of the building owners and managers. Would love to see what rationale they've got, but also try to work with them on a solution. There's a lot of, again, this isn't every building. I think we've got some bad actors out there probably. And there's a lot of other managers and building owners that they know that they want to have a great building where the residents love living there and tell positive stories. Just look at some of these buildings where they're getting hit like this with these predatory fees and fines. They don't want to live there anymore. They share really bad reviews of these buildings, and their reputation takes a hit, which then makes it harder for them to attract future tenants. So I think it's a couple of bad actors that are actually behind most of this, and I hope we can put a stop to it.
Gotcha. Okay, well, I wanted to make sure that I'd seen some media coverage of this, but I wanted to make sure it got more attention. So now we can pivot to the main topic that I wanted to talk about today, which was the STEER Act, which I think is a real landmark piece of legislation. But there's a lot of it's interesting, I think, how the policy was developed, and I think it kind of exposes once again the district's odd role living in a 3-state area and how that sometimes ties our hands behind our back. So can you talk a bit about that bill, what it encompasses, where it stands now? I know we just passed a key date, October 1st, for the bill. That'll get us started.
Sure. Well, let's take a step back to actually talk about what's the problem we're trying to solve. And that is that we have been seeing dangerous driving on the streets of DC, on our roads, in our neighborhoods for many years. We've seen traffic injuries, traffic fatalities, collisions only going up, not going down. And a large amount of it has to do with dangerous drivers. I think we obviously need to, and I've been one of the loudest people arguing for better design of our streets and roadways to slow traffic down, but that's only one part of it. the engineering and design work can only take you so far. You've got to have enforcement on the drivers that are actually putting people at risk and just driving recklessly through our neighborhood. So a couple of years ago, I started a push on what's called ticket reciprocity. What that means is if you are a Maryland driver and you drive dangerously through DC and you rack up a bunch of speeding tickets, reciprocity would mean that when you go back and you're going to renew your vehicle in Maryland, you'd have to pay off your tickets before you can renew that. And similarly, if you're a DC resident and you're driving dangerously and recklessly in Maryland, when you come to renew your vehicle, you'd have to do the same thing. That doesn't exist though. In most other places, they have what's called ticket reciprocity, and here we do not. And over the last couple of years, out-of-state drivers have racked up hundreds and hundreds of millions of dollars in unpaid dangerous speeding tickets. And they'll say it, they'll tell you, they don't believe there's any accountability, so they don't have to pay it, they don't have to change their behavior, they can just keep on driving the way they're driving. And they put you, me, and everybody else at risk every single day. So I've asked for reciprocity. I've asked for the mayor and the governors to work on this. Hadn't happened. I'm sick and tired of waiting. So we passed legislation that actually gave the attorney general of the district new powers to be able to go after drivers who have a pattern of dangerous, reckless driving and have large unpaid ticket balances, and can now sue them in court and go after them. And this applies to everybody. So whether it doesn't just have to be a Maryland or Virginia driver, it could be a DC driver, it could be Pennsylvania, it could be South Carolina. But the attorney general will now have the authority. They've hired 2 attorneys that are going to start going after this. You'll start to see cases rolling out, I hope, very soon. And it's going to really change the way that we can go after those dangerous drivers and hold them accountable. It does more than just that, though. It creates a new point system for dangerous driving, for speeding. Our current system has been based on the consequence that you pay is the price of the ticket. So, Josh, if you and I get 5 speeding tickets, I pay all 5 of them off. I write my check. I've got plenty of money, and so I'm just going to write those checks and pay the fine. You, however, don't have the money to pay those 5 tickets, and so you still have them. Just because I could pay the ticket, am I a safe driver? I'm not. I just had the means to be able to pay the ticket, right? So what it does, it changes our point system to say someone who's showing a pattern of repeated, dangerous, reckless driving, we eventually will come actually boot and immobilize your vehicle because you are a dangerous driver. It also, in the name of equity, also makes sure that we actually create a system where people can get part of that ticket and that money they owe refunded, essentially, forgiven by taking safe driving classes. Because what's my goal? Is my goal money or is my goal safe driving? My goal is safe driving. So we want to be able to create an opportunity for folks to be able to take safe driving classes and change behavior, be a better driver. That's what I want. And the last thing the bill does is for that person that refuses to change, continues to drive dangerously over and over and over again, reckless driving, we will now install a speed governor on your car. Think of what we do, for example, with someone who has repeated DUIs. We put a breathalyzer on the car where that person has to actually demonstrate that they have not been drinking to operate a vehicle when they want to get their license back. Similarly, now we will put a speed governor on that car so that it cannot be driven faster than the speed limit. It'll use GPS technology. There's other states that have been piloting this program very effectively. And so it will go after those worst offenders and make sure that when they get their license back, if they get their license back, they have not shown that they can be trusted to drive a car. And so we are going to make sure that they have a speed governor. So it's a new day on enforcement. It's a new day on the systems that we have to hold people accountable. And all of it is geared towards creating safer streets and safer neighborhoods.
Let me just go back quickly to reciprocity before we leave it. What is the barrier here? I mean, is this just a numbers game where Maryland and Virginia does not think they're not going to get a ton of money from district drivers, whereas because we are the center of the local economy and people need to come here for work, for entertainment, plus we're just in the middle and people might pass through, that just the numbers don't work and they see their people taking a hit?
I think it's twofold. I think it's certainly a function of that, in that if you are the governor of Maryland and your residents / voters owe hundreds of millions of dollars to the District of Columbia and you tell them they got to pay up, you might have some angry constituents. The second thing, though, is there's a deal to be had here. But the mayor has not made this a priority. This has not been something the mayor has pushed on the governors, has worked on trying to find a solution to. So I could keep asking nicely. I could keep writing letters to all three executives of those three jurisdictions, asking them to do this. And I've done that. And I think I'm not alone on the council. I'm just tired of asking nicely. So we decided, let's just change the law because it's not coming from somewhere else. We're going to have to do it. And that's what's going to happen. But the reciprocity itself, there's still a deal to be had. You know, there's ways that we could structure something that works for everybody. I've talked with electeds, for example, in Maryland and Virginia, who don't believe that DC residents are responsible for tolls that maybe they don't pay in Maryland and Virginia. Listen, quick PSA, don't speed. If you do speed, pay your speeding ticket. If you're going to take a toll road, pay your toll. I believe that everyone has to be held accountable. And so there's a deal to be had maybe somewhere out there. But in the absence of anybody actually making a push on that from the executive branch, we're going to have to do it.
And I think a lot of this debate exists at the kind of intersection of, is driving a right? Is driving a privilege? Is driving a necessity? And I think there's simultaneously all three of those are in play, and folks' perspectives on this bill, or where they come down on that issue, kind of affects their thoughts on the bill.
I find pretty much across the board, everybody wants to see safe drivers. People have a pretty low tolerance of somebody who's going to drive recklessly through their neighborhood. And that's whether somebody needs to drive to work, whether they need to take the bus, whether they walk, whether they ride a bike. There's a fairly low and shared low tolerance of somebody who wants to drive recklessly and dangerously through our neighborhoods. So I have gotten folks across the board that are very excited about this new law. They want to see it be successful. They want to see it make a difference. But they're not caught up in the issue of is driving a privilege or not. They know that for some people, they need to be able to drive somewhere. I wish that everybody had easy access to great, affordable, reliable transit. And I'm going to continue to help advocate that we get to that space one day. But for some people, they need to drive. But it doesn't seem to matter much, what I find when talking to folks, whether you drive a car, take a bus, ride a bike, take a scooter, or you're on foot. If somebody's driving dangerously to your neighborhood, you're not happy about it and you want to see a different thing.
Right. I mean, all rights have limits. You can't shout fire in a crowded theater, and you can't drive like a maniac and hurt and kill people. That, again, seems very clear. If pretend we were a state that didn't have people crossing over constantly from other places, how do states traditionally deal with this issue? How do they keep the most dangerous drivers off the road, and are some of those tools limited to us? And that's why we're taking this approach. Or is this how other states have done it, and we're just getting it right? We're going
to be one of the leading places in America that's going to be trying to tackle this issue. Listen, we've seen injuries and deaths have gone up across the country from collisions, and so that is very problematic of what we've seen. You know, the district, however, has had a much higher proportion of injuries and fatalities. So while other jurisdictions saw an increase and then saw it start to decrease, the district hasn't. It just keeps on going up. And so that is why the things we're doing just aren't working. Other states may do it a little bit differently, but I think we're going to be one of the first to give an attorney general this type of legal authority to go after dangerous drivers. So I think we're going to see other places look to us and then start copying what the district does, and what I hope we do very successfully.
Yeah, I think what ever since COVID, I feel like the Vision Zero goals have been struggling and have not been.
It was before then too, though. You know, ever since the mayor declared Vision Zero in 2015, and fatalities went up every year. The trend line certainly, I think, got more exaggerated during the pandemic, but that trend line was not going in the right direction before then either.
Yeah, and I feel like the one. Every accident's a tragedy, but the one on Rock Creek Parkway was just a particularly galling incident.
It was, and it was part of the impetus for this legislation. So for folks that may not remember, what we're talking about is a collision on Rock Creek Parkway where a woman who should not have had her license. She was driving drunk. She'd had multiple DUIs. She had other DUIs in the region. There was a complete failure between the courts and the DMV to communicate The STEER Act also cleans that up to make sure that it is very clear when someone is convicted of DUI, that information goes to the DMV, that person's license is removed, and there are stiff consequences and penalties to it. So there were 3 people killed that day, and she walked away. It was devastating, and it was her actions, obviously, that created that collision in that moment. But there were failures of government along the way to be able to get that person off the streets, out from behind the wheel of a car, and potentially have changed the outcomes.
And I think people at home, rightly are furious watching news stories. They shake their fist at the screen and say, "Why don't people change this?" And I think they miss the complexity of legislation, the number of things you have to keep in mind, the fact that we're at the center of 3 jurisdictions, the fact that the federal government is here, the fact that we can't ignore racial equity issues, and then the fact that some folks need to drive, have no other options. So the ability to craft a piece of legislation that solves all of these complexities, takes them all into account, and still gets us where we're going is a remarkable thing.
Well, I appreciate that. Thank you.
Yeah, it's now, speaking of those complexities, though, in my understanding is that parts of the bill are already funded, and parts of the bill will need to be funded, hopefully in the upcoming budget cycle, the next budget cycle.
Correct. So the Attorney General's authority has been fully funded, and the speed governor's has been fully funded. All the DMV pieces with the courts around DUI convictions has been funded and implemented. The ticketing, or the point system, the point system has not been funded yet. And that's something we're going to continue to work with the mayor's office on. They came back, I think, with a bit of an unrealistic fiscal impact that they claimed it would have. And after I finished laughing at it, I then said, okay, let's see what we can do to help get that back to a more reasonable amount. And we'll work on that. But, I think that we have to take action, and just sitting back and making excuses about what the funding could or couldn't be without trying to find a solution is the worst part. That's what people shake their fist at, is people aren't even trying to solve the problem. So that part's very frustrating. I applaud my colleagues as well for joining me on this and really pushing hard to make a difference. And as you said, make sure there's equity in mind. I'm not after the money. I'm after safer driving. So being able to let people have their tickets forgiven, it gets back to the point system I talked about earlier. Just because if 2 people get the same number of tickets and one of them can write a check to pay off those tickets, but one can't, that doesn't make the person that had the money a safer driver. It just means they had money. That was it. So let's be smarter about the way that we do this if what our goal is safer driving, safer streets and safer roads. And I think that's what the law is going to ultimately achieve as we get the other pieces fully implemented.
Now, this is sort of in the arcane weeds of how budgets work, but this bill seems like ultimately it will be, this is not why you're doing it, but it will be a revenue generator. As people are pursued and our out-of-state folks pay taxes, it will create revenue that I would think would more than cover what you said are the very limited costs of implementing this separate parallel point system for automated tickets. Can't that be incorporated in the decision about whether or not the bill's aspects are funded? Or
potentially, the CFO tends to go ahead and count all the money from the tickets that were issued as if it were all revenue coming in. So they can't count the ticket revenue that actually does come in as new revenue, because that'd be double counting the money. So as long as they keep counting, assuming that everyone's going to be paying, I think we have a problem with that. But if we can change that dynamic a little bit and work with the CFO, I'm all for it.
And if that's the way they count and so many tickets go unpaid, how do they not have a problem reconciling the budget every single year?
Yes.
Yes. Not a budget guy, but yeah, some of this stuff throws me. So would you predict that in the next budget cycle that the final element of this will hopefully get funded, that there will be a solution to this?
I certainly hope so. It's hard to predict. I mean, we obviously don't know what our budget's going to look like for next year yet, but I know it'll continue to be a big priority for me.
Yeah. Another revenue generation issue that's in the news just today is this question of what percent of bus riders pay the fare prior to COVID and since, with big change from, I think, 17% not paying before, and now the claim is 70% are not paying the fare. And as a bus rider, the number of times the bus driver waves you onto the bus, says either the fare card reader is broken or just they want to keep moving, or, you know, I find that number, first of all, I find calling it fare avoidance is not super accurate, because I want to pay.
Correct.
Like when they're waving me on, I'm like, no, it'll take just a second. Let me buzz in. But anyway, I just kind of would like your reaction as the chair of the relevant committee. What do you think is going on with that crazy number?
Yeah, well, people seem to have forgotten a small fact, which was that we had a global pandemic. And during the pandemic, Metro kept running and operating, which is great. What they also did is they turned their buses into a fare-free system. If you remember, Metro Bus said, we're not charging fares, because what they were concerned about was the interaction and the potential virus transmission. So for about a year, we ran buses without asking anybody to pay for it. And then they just kind of in a press release said, hey, by the way, we're gonna start charging fares again. So this number of 17 to 70% ignores the fact that we turned the entire system fare free for a period of time. And when you do that, it's very hard to get people to come back on and start paying. Secondly, though, you're absolutely right. I mean, as somebody who rides the bus pretty regularly myself, I have bus drivers who get very annoyed with me when I try to tap my card and when I'm trying to pay, because they want to stay, they want to keep moving, they want to get people on. They'll just wave people on and say the meter's not working. Multiple times I've gotten on and the card reader itself says out of order. So that's not fare evasion. When the driver tells you to get on and not tap, when the machine itself isn't working, you can't call that fare evasion. So I don't believe the number is accurate. I do believe, though, that there's fewer people paying their fares on the bus than there were pre-pandemic. But we definitely need the context of understanding and remembering we moved to a fare-free system for a good time, and that's going to change people's behaviors. And when you have drivers that are just telling you still today, get right on, that's going to impact behaviors. But the fare revenue generation from Metro Bus is a very, very small portion of WMATA's overall budget. They're not on the cusp of financial calamity over bus fare revenue. They had the biggest spending pressures, and WMATA will tell you this, the biggest spending pressures they've had are inflation, rising costs for their contracts for employees, raising wages, which is a good thing. Those are the things that are driving your costs. Those are the things, and decreased ridership from the pandemic. Those are the things that drive your cost pressures. We still have not recovered our rail ridership, and that's a huge chunk of revenue from rail ridership. So it's a bit of a false narrative to say that WMATA's financial problems are anywhere due to what they're calling fare evasion, or the reduction in number of people who are paying their fares on the bus. But it's a bit more of a complex story than I think some people in the media might want you to believe. And I think that doesn't really do a service to how complex the conversation actually is.
And how do we gauge bus ridership? I know that there's at least a story that the drivers, if someone gets on and doesn't pay, they tap a button or something like that, so that they're counting that the person rode, even if the person isn't paying. But how can we, like with the circulator, ridership is down. The circulator was the worst case where you would always get waved on every single time.
Yeah.
How can we, the bus is an essential, the lifeblood of the city. And I don't know if we have an accurate sense of how many people use the bus because of this whole wave on issue.
I think I do think we actually have a pretty good sense of who's on, because there are counts, there's audited counts of that. It's all going to be an estimation, of course, but I feel pretty confident roughly with the numbers that we see. But I do think people are skeptical, though. I hear that all the time of, how do you actually know how many people are on? What WMATA will tell you is they have counters on the bus. It's not the bus driver themselves doing it, although that is one part of the system. They also actually, the number of people that pass through it, they have ways that they use to count and use that technology to count how many people are on a bus and how many get on and get off. So I think the numbers they share are fairly accurate. I just think the story behind it is, like many things, just a little bit more complex than a headline or a single tweet will allow you.
Do the bus companies, Metro, did they interface at all with technology? Because I know Google tells me ahead of time how busy the bus is going to be before I get on. Is any of that information captured? Are there any partnerships?
Yeah. No, WMATA keeps that information. They use that as a way to help plan for how many buses should be on a route, how to kind of deploy overcrowding and how to prevent overcrowding, how to respond to it. So they do have that data. I think WMATA, especially in the last few years, has done a great deal of embracing and using technology to help them see their fleet, see their riders in a different and better way.
And this is a bigger issue we're not going to solve today, but how there seems in media a lot of inherent bias against non-driver transportation users. Again, this story is presented as 70% fare evasion. The tickets for people that are driving illegally in the bus lane. A lot of the media framing is a pro-driver, anti-transit walker, biker perspective, and what can be done to reorient that perspective?
I think calling them out on it's important. I know when I talk to reporters, for example, when they talk about, somebody is struck in an intersection. If I see a reporter use the word accident, I reach out to him, because what an accident! It's a collision. The person was struck, but our words and the choice of our words matter. If I tell you it's an accident, that sounds like it just was complete dumb luck. Gosh, golly gee, what could we have done about that? It's just an accident, right? And that was if you look back at the history of this, it was a very intentional move by a very car-centric space to frame this as an accident. You can go look up the term jaywalking and look at the history of it. Very similar, where people used to be able to use the public space and walk around in it. There was a very intentional effort to start criminalizing jaywalking because it was around prioritizing the car in that public space. There's a lot of history behind this. And I think from a reporting standpoint, you want to be able to help call it out. I frankly have seen a lot of reporters respond to that pretty well and start changing the way they even use things and say, to talk about it as there was an individual struck, there was a collision that took place, and not using the word accident. And that initial framing matters a lot. When just a couple of weeks ago, about a month ago, there was a girl who was in the crosswalk, leaving school, headed to the library. Driver decides that he just can't wait for a stop sign or for a red light. Goes around a car that's already stopped the red light in front of him, blows through the intersection, strikes Paisley as she's in the crosswalk, breaks her foot, and then gets out and has the audacity to yell at her that she walked into his car in the crosswalk running through a red light. Initial reports were, girl injured in an accident. It wasn't an accident. He has now been charged with criminal reckless driving. It's not an accident. So our word choices matter. And I think as we kind of continue to confront that, I think my hope certainly is that the framing of these stories will change to be a much more equitable space.
Yeah, I feel like the battle to get the news framed correctly is hopefully easier to win than the battle to get the legislation right and to solve the underlying problem. But I feel like sometimes it's fighting two battles at once.
Yeah.
Okay. We're running out of fun rounds, so we're going to pivot very quickly to something new. Folks don't know enough about what council members do outside of work, and that you all enjoy having fun, like many of us. So the question I want to ask is, you can give me any of these, your desert island, if you had to pick one, movie, TV show, song, book, food, website, social media feed. Answer any or all of these. What do you love to do when you're not doing your job? And what are your go-tos?
I pick one, or can I pick a couple?
You can pick all of them, as many as you want.
I am a pretty big Star Wars nerd, and so I do really enjoy reading a lot of Star Wars. There's a lot of novels out there. We're not just talking fan fiction, but there's a lot of Star Wars books that I really kind of nerd out on. I really enjoy that. My family puts up with me. I enjoy watching a lot of the Disney Plus Star Wars shows, Mandalorian, Ahsoka. I love that stuff. So I completely nerd out on it. I enjoy baseball. I'm the assistant coach of my son's little league team, and make sure I prioritize finding the time to do that. That's a lot of fun. I enjoy that. So if I'm on a desert island, I've got a TV. If I can at least pick up a couple of baseball games, that'd be kind of fun to watch.
And how about food? What are your weaknesses?
Food, anything. Give me some chocolate. I'll be good. I can eat chocolate chip cookies all day long. Thin Mints in particular, always good.
Gotcha. And people see social media a lot of times as negative or stressful, but is there anything on social media that you are just fascinated by that's not work related or stress inducing?
I think social media is just, it's a wonderful, safe and warm, fuzzy place. It's filled with positivity and unicorns and rainbows. And it's a healthy space to really spend a lot of time scrolling through. Absolutely.
It's just like you have to pick your diet carefully.
What I love is that it's all accurate too. There's no misinformation or disinformation. You can trust anything you read, on Twitter. It's a great space.
Yes. But are there any? There is.
I need to put an asterisk next to that I'm being
there is good there. A dumb subreddit that I enjoy is what is this cookie cutter? Where someone will put out a photo of a cookie cutter and ask people what they think it is. And people use it for art and silliness. And it's the kind of thing I go to, like dog videos, like the kind of thing you go to when you're the part of social media you're describing that's killing your brain and your emotions gets to you. Do you have a happy social media place that you go to for relief? No. Hell no.
No. What are you talking about? There's a happy social media place? I'm not sure that exists.
I was trying. I got a couple. I might want to recommend you find one or two.
All right, give me your list later then.
It saves you from the rest of it. But anyway, thank you again, as always, for coming on for an interview. I'm very, very grateful. And listeners, if please remember to subscribe to our podcast on SoundCloud or wherever you get your podcasts. Just search under Hearing the Council. Thanks again for joining us. Tune in next time. We're on DC Radio 96.3 FM on your HD4 dial or at dcradio.gov. I'm Josh Gibson. This is not a council hearing. This is Hearing the Council. Thank you.
Thanks, Josh.
Really appreciate it. Stay safe out there.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye-bye.